everybody, and welcome back to the Places We'll Go show. Another stunner today, and I'm very, very pleased to welcome Larissa Vince to the show.
Hi, Mark.
Hey, Larissa.
Hi,
Well,
Richie.
fabulous to have you on. Long overdue. I'm going to do a bit of an intro for people who aren't familiar with Larissa. I've actually known Larissa since, I don't know the exact date, but anyway, early 2014. And the reason I remember it so well was that Larissa was on the Saatchi team that went on to create the Direct Line Fixer campaign in all its glory. And so actually, the truth is I have a very large debt of gratitude to Larissa, alongside Magnus Java, Richard Huntington, Paul Sayburn, and many others, some of whom have been on the show. For what was actually a defining moment in mine and probably several people's careers. So before I get well up and get too emotional, let me tell you a bit about Larissa. I think Larissa is actually a titan of the advertising industry. She's CEO of TBWA London now for a couple of years, an award-winning agency that describes itself as the disruption company and believes that a business can never outperform a market by adhering to its conventions. So we'll get into that a little bit. They've got massive clients and aspect lifties in this Hilton. Previously was CEO of Now for 2 years, so multiple CEO. And worked at Saatchi Fallon for 9 years and rose up to be MD of Saatchi London. But prior to that, Larissa was a journalist, deputy editor campaign, worked at campaign for 6 years. Outside of all that, Larissa is also on the IPA Council and heavily involved in WACL, not least in terms of being on the Festival of Talent Committee. What is Larissa like in a nutshell? I think Larissa is direct, fun, very cool under pressure, key thing there, but also ambitious. So I think you bring a cocktail of lovely things to conversations and projects and to your work. So I'm super delighted to have you on the show, Larissa. You're very, very welcome.
Wow, that is absolutely the most wonderful intro I've ever had. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Hey, there you go. Well, that's about the niceties over. Let's get into the jam-packed action. Hey, Larissa, awesome to have you on. I'll go easy on you to begin with. How you doing? Where are you at the moment, and how's the last couple of weeks been?
Good, thank you. Yeah, very good. I don't know, the end of Q1. It's been a busy first quarter of the year, which is really good. I feel very optimistic about this year. Somebody told me they admired I think they said, bloody-minded optimism. But I actually did enter this year feeling very, very much in a positive frame of mind. And so far, thank goodness, that's been the way it's been.
Yeah, no, it's a thread. I mean, it helps to be an optimist, doesn't it? Particularly in marketing and advertising. I saw you on a panel right at the beginning of the year with other agency CEOs, and you said the same thing. So I can tell everybody it's very consistent. You are optimistic. What makes you?
Yeah.
What brings your optimism in this way?
From a TBWA point of view, I'm pretty optimistic. We've got a great team in place that brings a level of confidence and optimism. But I also think confidence and optimism is really important to successful performance. It's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more you feel negative, the more the narrative of negativity, let's say, permeates, the more likely you are to not perform so well. So I always try and encourage everybody to be optimistic, look for solutions, don't focus on problems is very much the way I like to. And also, by the way, it makes you feel better, which I think is another really important thing.
Hey, well, certainly in these times, for a lot of us, anything that makes us feel better is a good thing. I love the thought when you talked about optimism equals successful performance and enduring performance, I'm sure. Maybe you could elaborate for us a little bit on what you found, particularly within the context of teams, to actually create high performance across the business and marketing landscape.
Yeah, I mean, high performance is obviously is the thing we're all striving for, and there's so many theories and approaches you could take. One of the things I was reading recently, a study that I can't remember who did it. I think it was McKinsey, but I might be misattributing. Anyway, it was before the pandemic. They brought some technology into office workplaces and actually watched the behaviors of the most successful teams. They found that the key quality that they all shared was communication, but crucially face-to-face communication and communication outside of meetings. So, which I found really interesting. This was way pre-pandemic, but I do think communication is extremely important, and often is the thing we forget to do or we don't have time to do. And particularly in jobs like mine, where you are running from one thing to another, it's very easy to forget that proper communication with teams is really going to help them perform better. I do think optimism. I mean, not blind optimism. There's no point just sort of ignoring any sort of potential issue that's coming down the track and being too Pollyanna-ish. But generally speaking, a spirit of optimism on behalf of your clients as well as on behalf of your team, I think is probably the right way to be things.
So optimism keeps coming up, and that's a key point about optimistic for your clients, because often they're under a lot of pressure.
Absolutely.
So I mean, let's go all the way back. So tell us a bit about growing up for you, Larissa, and maybe there's a thread to where that sense of optimism comes from.
Wow. Yes, maybe. So I grew up in a little village just outside Guildford. My mum is from Trinidad. My dad is English. So we were the only mixed heritage family in the village. In fact, when we moved in, I remember the village had to have a village council meeting about the situation, because it was so unusual. I guess it never happened before. What I will say is, obviously, we were very happy there. So it wasn't as though terrible things happened. But I suppose when you do grow up in a very white middle class environment and you're not like that, do you feel a little bit other? I remember my brothers in particular used to feel very much like that. How was my childhood? I don't know, really. Eldest of four. My dad was pretty absent. He was then entirely absent from the time I was about 18, 19. I think I really took charge of the family. Now, I don't know whether that was my personality or whether that was the situation that I was put in. But I definitely think that's made a difference to how I've approached my life, and probably shaped my personality in a way that I often think, I don't know if the way I am is nature or nurture. I mean, it's a mix, isn't it? Like all of us, but certainly that childhood situation really did bring out the need to take charge, sort of solve problems, that sort of thing. Sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a bad way.
There's some, I'm intrigued by that, and particularly around the role that when you talked about, father not necessarily being too present, particularly as you entered stages where you'd probably be thinking about your career.
Yeah.
How did you navigate that, and how did you kind of figure out that sort of the marketing and advertising space was for you versus other industries?
Well, to answer the first part of the question, because it was very normal to me that my dad wasn't around much, I didn't give it much thought. It's only with benefit of hindsight that I think, well, of course that must have impacted me and all of us, really. But at the time, writing. It's one of those careers, isn't it? I think often you two talk about this. There are very few people at school that think desperately they want to get into marketing and advertising, but journalism is one of those vocations, like teaching or being a doctor, that people have heard of and actually they do want to do. So that was me. I was one of those people. So I actually did a law degree at university. I can't really remember why. I realised pretty quickly it wasn't the right way forward. And then, then did a journalism conversion course and spent quite a few happy years in that industry before moving into this one.
So journalism is a bit of a wild ride at times, but you were very successful, got to deputy editor at Campaign. You must have had loads of fun. What was some of the best bits? I don't know, the best scoop, or I don't know. What was the best of it?
There were loads. I actually, this is very parochial, and I used to always come home and tell my husband these things, and he'd be like, "Yeah, how interesting." But anyway, one of the moments. This is the way it used to work. At the time on Campaign, it was a weekly, and we had a print issue to fill, and that always brought a certain level of pressure, because there was a certain amount of space that you had to fill with interesting things. Sometimes it was quite hard to find the interesting things. And the definition of news in the sort of classic sense is something that interests people, but that somebody doesn't want you to tell. as in a story that somebody doesn't want you to tell. So very rarely was it sort of press releases or, things that people actually wanted us to know. There was this, Mark, you'll remember Robert Senior, who was, he actually hired me into Saatchi's in the end. But he and I had what I would describe as quite a sort of fractious relationship when I was the journalist and he was the CEO of Saatchi's, partly because I used to be a little thorn in his side, always finding out things that he didn't want people necessarily to be writing about. But when he was made CEO of Saatchi and Fallon, I called him on a Wednesday, and we were going to press on a Wednesday. And the trick was you always called them on a Wednesday, so they didn't have time to get out of it. And then you wrote it and it appeared on the Thursday. And I called him and said, I hear you're taking this job, Robert, and we're going to write it tomorrow. And, there was a moment of silence. They went into a bit of a rant, as he sometimes had the tendency to do. I'm on a plane, Larissa, I'm on the tarmac, I'm about to take off, I'm going to be in the air for 11 hours. I haven't told any of my clients. I haven't told any of the people at the agency, you can't possibly. And I said, is it true though? And he said, yes. And I said, well then, sorry, we're doing it. And then obviously he was cut off as the plane is still ranting. It's halfway through his rant, just like reached into the clouds. And we went ahead and we did it. And of course, now I really appreciate what an absolute nightmare that was for him. But at the time, I quite happily thought to myself, off we go and we'll do it. And, I have deep sympathy for him now. I actually, then when I stopped being a journalist, I left journalism and decided I needed to do something else. And I never thought he would be the one who, there were a few, but he was the one really, he was very keen to hire me at that time. And it was a good lesson for me because often the people with whom you have the most discussion or, the younger me thought, he doesn't like me, we're always arguing. But the reality is he really respected me and he respected what I did. And he sort of saw me as a kind of a really worthy, smart person that then he went on to want to hire. So, I find that was quite a good lesson at the time.
Just wanted to do a tiny little follow-up there. That's such an important point about being liked or being respected. And they're obviously very different things. I'd just love you to say build on that a little bit more about what you think the distinction is and where it goes right and wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I spent a long time, far too long, wanting to be liked or confusing being liked with being respected. And yeah, you're right. It's not the same thing at all. I mean, obviously nobody wants to be disliked. And I think that's obviously, you don't want to tend into that space. But it's important in all good relationships to be able to have constructive conflict, to be able to discuss things, particularly in creative companies. We're not always going to agree. And even within the agency, but also sometimes with the client, quality relationships are really built on mutual respect. But that does mean that sometimes you are going to disagree with each other. And that's an important part of the creative process, I think.
Well, I mean, particularly when your tagline or your pipped as being a disruption company, where you currently sit today. So tell us a little bit more about that at TBWA and how, you rub up against the friction that gets created or sparked, which then infuses into bigger, greater, better ideas.
Yeah,
How's that dynamic out?
So disruption has been TBWA's, not just its tagline, but also a process and methodology for more than 40 years. I think when TBWA first, and the author of that is a guy who still is with us called Jean-Marie Drew. When it first came about, it was not necessarily a very used word, and it's now been very overused, I think, in business and is a very sort of popular term. For TBWA, disruption means probably something a little bit different to the sort of generally the general sort of view of what disruption means. It doesn't mean doing something different for the sake of it. It doesn't mean anarchy. It doesn't mean sort of, fighting off the traditional channels. It's actually a very sort of purposeful, strategic process, which is designed to find the right space to help brands grow. It's very grown up, I suppose, is the way I'd say it. There's an awful lot of input that goes into it, data, trends. We invest very much as an agency in that side of things. So whilst we do tend to ask clients to make choices and to sort of go with us on the journey to to creating change for their brands, it's done in a very thoughtful and well researched and well proven way. Versus sometimes I think people can think you wander in with a wacky creative idea and go, hey, it's not that. It's not that. It mostly happens in strategic development. And I think Mark referenced the work we did when I was at Saatchi's, actually, and Mark was a direct line. I would describe that campaign as very disruptive because it took a strategic shift. It sort of moved category conversation from price to value, which was a very disruptive approach in the insurance category at the time. So I think that helps with an example that Mark knows very well to describe what it is and how it works.
Yeah, we're going to come back to your multiple CEO roles. But let's just indulge for a moment about the time with Direct Line.
Yes.
So, I mean, just one thing that I recall is that on pitch day, you hadn't planned for this, but I think it was Extinction Rebellion turned up with
it was awful. It was Greenpeace, Mark.
Greenpeace. Everyone, they were there in their gorilla suits. And we rocked up to the building and we thought, well, maybe this is just how these guys roll.
Pitch theatre.
Like the ultimate pitch theatre. But you're right. I mean, that was a campaign that was very disruptive, but based on extremely strong strategy and strategic thinking. I'd just love to get your perspective on, how it all came together. What was it like being in that cauldron and the experience of Fixer campaign through your eyes?
Well, I mean, it was such a wonderful thing to be part of, and the results of it are just obviously no one needs me to tell the results because they've been so redefining for a whole category. I think not just for the brand, but I always think it's really important as well to remember where Direct Line had come from. So the brand did not have a history of sort of game changing marketing. Let's say it wasn't a marketing led organization. And so, when we first met Mark and the rest of Mark's team, there was a bit of skepticism our end, actually, as to whether as an organization, the clients actually did have the appetite to do what it said in their brief that they wanted to do. But very quickly on meeting the team, we got that confidence and we were like, yeah, these people are serious. They actually do want to make some significant change for the brand. And like all campaigns, there were some, amazingly hairy moments. There were some moments where, we weren't sure what we were doing was going to come off. I do remember, Mark, I don't know if we've ever talked about this. I think it was in the final pitch. So we pitched with the idea of Harvey Keitel reprising his role as Winston Wolfe in Pulp Fiction. And it was quite a complex thing from a sort of licensing and, all that sort of stuff. So we had to get permission, not just from Harvey that he wanted to do it, but also from Quentin Tarantino and Miramax that the property was able to be used and the character was able to be used. And we were running right up against it. So I think the pitch was only about 3 or 4 months before the work actually needed to be live in market. There was a discussion in the pitch about, this really isn't going to work if it's not Harvey. What are we going to do if it's not Harvey? And either Mark or one of the team, I don't know who it was, sort of turned around to the Saatchi team and said, he's definitely going to be up for it, isn't he? And the team were like, yeah, no problem. Came out of the meeting going, well, we haven't even spoken to anyone. So I don't know if you actually knew that, Mark. But anyway, so then you know what I mean? There's always sort of slightly hairy moments where you think, right, we need to get this sorted now. But it obviously it all came off and came off brilliantly. And yeah, thanks for the kind words about it, Mark. It's a huge thing, I think, for all of us at the agency too.
Hey, there you go. A story that almost wasn't to be had, but
many times.
Wonderful.
Probably.
Yeah, well, thank you for some of those inside scoops there. It just goes to show, right, that a lot of the time, the answers emerge as opposed to there being sort of plain on a page, But picking up on what you said there, Larissa, when you said, we weren't sure this was going to work. And interestingly, I mean, in marketing, I think we're in the game of risk reduction a lot of the time when we try and introduce the research and, speak to consumers about it and the concepts. And yet there is a whole, I say, bridge of ambiguity that exists to, once it's out there, is it truly going to take off?
Yeah.
And in your role at TBWA, I'm quite intrigued, because if you're, despite all the well-planned and well-oiled machine, I'm sure you are in the disruptive space, there must still be elements of risk.
Of course.
And how do you, I guess, how do you nurture your clients into a place and space where they trust you enough to be able to come on that journey with you and enable that sort of element of risk-taking to take place in order for the magic to shine through?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a big subject, this. And I don't know if you guys would agree, I think clients are under more pressure probably than they've ever been. Commercial pressure, there seem to be more stakeholders involved in decisions than I've ever seen. I think it makes life really difficult for clients to make, let's say, to forge new paths, because I think that, there is some comfort in doing things that have been done before because they work. And so repeating behavior can feel quite a safe space to be in. At least no one's going to fire you, if it goes wrong. But as we all know, if you do want disproportionate change for your brand or your business, you relying on the same thing that you've always done is probably not the correct strategy, unless you're in an extremely high growth market, or unless, you're fortunate enough to be benefiting from, I don't know, trends and things that are happening outside of your control. So, we do need to work really closely with clients to help as much as we possibly can create the confidence in the decisions that they're making, and the confidence for the wider business in the decisions that they're making. I mean, you talked about trust, Richie. I'm absolutely obsessed with the importance of relationships with clients right now, like proper deep relationships of trust, where, the bumps in the road that inevitably happen, you can get through those together if you know that the client has your back, you have the client's back. It's a safe environment for challenge and to push each other, but you have to invest in those relationships. And I think it's more difficult now. This doesn't happen so much for TBWA, but some of my, I guess, industry friends that run independent agencies, and I used to run one myself, so simply for this, tell me that a lot of the work is moving towards project-based. And project-based work is a big shift for the industry. And I think it makes it very difficult for agencies to invest in relationships. And I actually don't think that's to a client benefit. I think it's a very difficult thing to sort of justify to procurement, that we need, it's a sort of a soft thing that you're trying to quantify, but it becomes very transactional. And I actually don't think that's good for anybody, if I'm honest. And I don't know Mark is a great example of a client that would always invest in partnership with the agency because he really could see the benefit of that. But I think, I do think this is a trend now that we're seeing across the board.
Yeah, I mean, where that came from, Larissa, was working at Mars, where mutuality is one of the principles. And it went something like a mutual benefit, a shared benefit is an enduring benefit. And so it meant that suppliers weren't there just to kick the crap out of. But let's move back to CEOs, Bill. And you've done 2 CEO roles now. You're now a serial CEO.
Oh God, how frightening!
Yeah, so
never thought that would come.
Many people aspire to be CEOs.
Madness. Don't even think about it for a second.
Well, for those that are suspending that madness, tell us more about it. What do you think got you there, and what do you think keeps you there?
Oh gosh, I mean, I never thought I would be a CEO. In fact, I had lunch the other day with an old friend that I've just known for years, and he looked at me and said, "How did this happen?" Larissa? I really don't know. I don't know. And I agree with you that I'm ambitious, and I have always been ambitious. It's a sort of a drive to. I sometimes think I've got a drive to achieve things, and if I don't achieve them, I feel like I haven't finished. That's more what it is, rather than thinking, I need to be this thing, or it's this job title, or something that I particularly want. But I guess it was that ambition that sort of got me here. Wow. I mean, I think the job's amazing. The job of CEO is amazing. It's pretty lonely. You have to have really great partners around you. There's obviously a lot of pressure, and I think, the job of the CEO in a network agency is very different to the job of a CEO of an independent agency. And I've done both of those two things. The challenges actually can be quite different. But yeah, it's a great role. It's a great role. Bit tiring, I'll say that, but it's great.
Yeah, I can imagine. There's a perception that people at the top have a crummy work-life balance.
Mhm.
And I wonder, is that perception true for you?
I think that if you take on a job like this, you have to accept that a certain amount of work is required. I mean, I work part-time for probably about 10 years of my career. A lot of that time at Saatchi's, I worked part-time. I did 2 days a week. I did 3 days a week. I did 4 days a week. And then eventually I went back to 5 days a week, which I think is quite unusual, actually, particularly in agencies. But the reason I went back to full-time was because I was being offered roles that I thought required me to be very present. And the reason I thought they required me to be present was because I thought the teams that were working into me needed me, or it wouldn't have been able to operate in a high performance way if, for example, I'd only been there 3 days a week. So I do think there's an element of choice. Everything in life is a choice. And if work-life balance is an extremely high priority for you as an individual, I wouldn't recommend that you become a CEO. You know, that's a positive choice you can make to take a different path. And that's definitely the way I looked at my career. When my children were really young, I wanted to prioritize spending time with them. And then as they grew older and, you know, all of us as a family felt that they were able to, you know, I was able to then shift again. Then I started moving into roles that required a bit more of me. On work-life balance now, I mean, I don't often work in the evenings. I mean, I do sometimes work in the evenings if necessary. We're an international agency, so sometimes I do need to do calls with other markets on different time zones. I very, very rarely work at the weekend. We have a very positive culture at TBWA. Even when pitching, we do our absolute utmost to make sure that the work we need to do is done within office hours. But we work really hard during those times. So, you know, I wouldn't say it was a relaxing role, but we work within defined parameters of time, which I think is probably the way that we create the balance that we can for people.
Yeah. It's always elusive, isn't it? It's tricky.
Yeah.
You said everything in life is a choice. I love that. It reminded me, somebody I know said that between every stimulus and action is a choice.
100%.
So now what are some of the best choices you've made?
Sometimes I didn't know they were doing that. I was making them, but yeah, I mean, I'm such a believer in this. You know, it's so easy to slip into sort of slightly victim mentality, isn't it? And think, oh God, it's so terrible and things are happening to me. But actually, it's not very empowering to have that sort of mindset. So I think if you can get out of it, it's really helpful to think, okay, how can I improve this situation? What choices can I make to get the outcome that I want? What actions can I take? And I've always thought like that. I don't really know where that comes from, but I have always thought like that. And I always try and encourage everyone that works for me to think about the world through that lens. You know, you have paths ahead of you and you can choose to take the right path for you, but don't just wait for things to happen to you. You know, take a bit of power into your hands around it.
Right. So this is when my question gets a bit more tricky. We've been easy on you so far. It's been good.
Okay, all right, I'm ready.
I'm kidding. What's been your biggest professional screw up?
Oh, I mean, this question is really, really hard when it comes out. There's been a lot of sort of what I'd say quite small ones. I don't think I've thankfully ever had anything that actually resulted in disaster, but there have been some real moments of, wow, okay, I shouldn't have done that. When I was a journalist, it was relatively common that you'd get something wrong. You know, you'd print something that wasn't correct. That was always a bit hairy. And obviously, you know, was terrible. You know, what I mean by that is, you know, you sort of, we used to have this sort of attitude of tomorrow's fish and chip paper. But I mean, seriously, you know, writing something incorrect about a person, and it was never anything terrible, but, you know, still, it can have quite a negative impact on that person. So I do regret some of those things. That was that rush of sort of trying to be fast versus making sure that you're actually accurate, which is quite an interesting dynamic in journalism. That's a real sort of fine balance. I think when it comes to the sort of second half of my career, so more of the advertising half of my career, I'd say one of the things I really struggle with is, and I've certainly struggled with this as I've sort of risen up, is where how much I'm going to be honest, I'm a bit of a control freak. I mean, I think a lot of people in our industry are quite control freaks, but obviously you get to a point where you have to sort of step back and really not be hands-on and involved in every single thing. Sometimes I think in my desire to not be a control freak, because I try and be very self-aware, and I have a coach who's constantly telling me off for all the things I'm bad at. Is very good at this. Sometimes I think there have been a couple of times, I prefer not to say the exact examples if you don't mind, but there have been a couple of times where I feel as though I have not stepped in soon enough, and that's caused potential challenges. But yeah, sorry if you don't mind. Probably best not if I don't say what those were.
Hey, no probs.
Yeah, well, you talked about taking charge of the family, so you can see that there's that desire for control, but then when you let go of it, it can be chaos. So there's a fine balance for sure there. So what is coaching to you? What do you get from coaching?
My coach has changed my life. He is he's been incredible for me. So I've worked with him, I'd say probably for about 10 years, I imagine. He's sort of come with me through the various roles, and he challenges me to look in the mirror. It's probably the best way I can describe it. He really pushes me to be better, and I really get so much benefit out of it. I think everyone should have a coach, particularly if they become senior within organizations. I think you you also, Mark, you've always taken a very coaching approach, I think, to the way that you run teams. I mean, that's the other thing I try and do is he's been of such benefit to me that I try and pass that benefit onto my own teams in as much as I can. I think coaching leadership is absolutely the right way to lead teams, working with people to try and help them create the right outcomes for the future. Don't just sort of charge in and do it for them or any of that sort of thing. It takes more time, but I think it's a really brilliant thing. So yeah, it's been amazing for me.
Way. So Larissa, I'm going to steer the conversation a little bit onto the world of pitching, because I think it's dramatically shifted, and you're probably sitting in quite the hot seat of probably doing this, or certainly your teams will be doing this all the time. So what is your take on the current process through which to gain new clients? Needs to evolve, stay the same, pros, cons? What's your thoughts?
It's such a perennial subject, this, isn't it? I mean, I do think we're probably the only industry that gives away our best product for free and then is sort of surprised that we're not really valued by clients. So I suppose from a sort of fundamental principle point of view, of course, we shouldn't be doing it. The reality is we are, and everyone does, and therefore that's the situation that you're in. And as an agency and as a leader of an agency, you just have to manage it as best you can. Because if we just turned around and said, well, we're not going to pitch creative work, you just wouldn't win any new business ever again. So that's just not realistic. However much I think the system's broken and should be different. I think sometimes I think, I know that clients do not think about pitching anywhere near as often as agencies do. So when a client comes to market, maybe they've never run a pitch before, probably don't know much about the market, don't really know how pitches should work. And I genuinely believe that a lot of the sort of crazy requests that we get around timings or process versus budget are just because people don't know that's not fair, or don't understand that the way that agencies work mean that, I've had the number where it would have cost us more to do the pitch than the size of the prize at the end. Often I find that when you talk to clients as humans, because everyone's just a person, aren't they? And just explain that actually people will change things, clients will change things, and often they're a bit embarrassed and they're sort of like, oh God, I just hadn't really thought about that. But I think agencies sometimes don't spend that time. They just go, oh, this is outrageous, and fling up their hands and sort of walk away. So I've always found that's not always, but often quite helpful. But yeah, it's really hard pitching in the sense that it's such a lottery. It's such a, how can I put it? It's such a non-representative process, in that you, as a client, you really won't know what an agency's actually like from doing a pitch. But yes, it's the process that you go through in order to choose an agency. I suppose is the really big problem with it.
I tell you, it reminds me of doing a job interview where you get an hour with somebody, and in that hour, how on earth are you supposed to really understand what they're going to
Yeah.
be, like to work with for years on end? So it does feel sometimes a few of these things might need a bit
Yeah.
of a revamp.
It's hard though. I think I'd sometimes ask clients, it's the trouble with pitching is normally something big's happened or big needs to happen, like it's a big decision. And so to your point, the thing about a job interview is, if you just message it, I think a job interview is more like a chemistry meeting. So you just meet an agency for an hour, have a nice chat and work out if you like each other and you look at their creds. That, in theory, that's how you should pick the agency. But I don't know whether that in itself would be enough, as in whether a client would have the confidence to be able to make a decision just on that. At least certainly that's not how it seems to go. So I assume not.
It's pitching is a wonderful thing at the same time, because that's the source of amazing creative work. But I do know, I've talked to many people agency side who talk about post-pitch blues. So you've had a massive amount of success, and there have been ups and downs. If looking to the next generation, that's the purpose of the School of Marketing, to bring people through and succeed and thrive, particularly from underrepresented backgrounds. What would be your advice, people contemplating or getting started?
Oh, I think that if I could, this classic question is that, like, if I could give myself advice when I was starting, I would say, don't worry so much. I spent such a long time when I was younger sort of worrying about when was my next promotion going to be, or, was I being paid the right amount, or, what was going to happen here, or did my boss think I was good, or, and it was just such an awful wasted effort. I had a real, epiphany around this. I think it must have been, anyway, I can't remember, 2 or 3 years ago, maybe a bit longer. I was going through a particularly worrying period, i.e., I was spending a lot of time sort of ruminating on, the situation. I can't remember in COVID, but anyway, something big was worrying me. And I was sitting on a bus on my way into somewhere, I think probably into the office, and I wasn't really concentrating, but there was a boy behind me, about 12, talking to his mum, and I just heard his mum say to him, "Oh my goodness, you're just like your dad, you never worry about anything." And he said, "But mummy, if you worry, you just get the bad thing twice." And I thought, oh God, like, the world has sent me this boy in this moment of need. But it really sort of stuck with me. And I really say that to people, don't worry. It's such a waste of energy, right? What does it do or achieve other than making you feel bad? Actually, just park the thought, put it to one side and keep going. And then either the thing will happen, but at least you haven't had the period of worrying, or it won't happen. I mean, there's a great quote, isn't there, from someone that said something like, all of the worst things in my life never actually happened to me. It's the amount of energy you spend sort of catastrophizing, and then of course the thing never happens, and so you shouldn't do it. So yeah, that's my biggest advice to young people starting out: lose the worry.
Hey, I love it. And it's a similar quote that I just read the other day around anticipation. That anticipation is far worse than the actual thing that actually happens. And
absolutely.
What you said, worry is to get the bad thing twice. Wow, wonderful. What a wonderful note to end on. Look, we're out of time here at the moment, so it's my job to, first of all, just say a massive, massive thank you. This has been such an incredible session. So many great nuggets of inspiration that have come through. And it's my job to try and summarize just a few. So here we go. Now, clearly reaching some incredible lofty heights, Larissa. But interestingly, what I found rather inspiring through that process is the way in which you've done it. Now, you admittedly suggested you might be a bit of a control freak, but on the other hand, had to, from a young age, really grip your life with both hands. You've been ambitious, you've been driven, but that's not really got in the way of your own family and actually what you felt has been important. And at different points in time, taken perhaps a step back from your career to spend time with your young'uns, and then got back on it later on. And I think that's a huge source of inspiration for so many, to think that actually you can do that and still be uber successful, which I think is absolutely brilliant.
No.
It obviously stems from this, underlying sense of optimism that you've got for yourself, as well as your teams and your clients, which have just absolutely shone through, through and through. And interestingly, that nugget you talked about, the research within the context of high-performing teams being all around communications, and actually face-to-face communications. I wonder if that's a bit of a sense and feeling that we all should be thinking about a little bit more, and not sit behind the screen just so much in our little virtual bubbles that we predominantly live in. I love the anecdote from Sachi and Sachi when you were giving away the CEO. I can't believe he gave you a job later on. That's amazing. I don't know how that happened, but look, go back to the difference between liked and respected, right? And the balance that you need to try and achieve from both those things. Disruption doesn't have to be this, hair-raising sort of thing. It can be far more what you termed as being strategic, maybe a bit more grown up, and actually looking for the white spaces to help brands grow, as opposed to being just completely out there. And of course, we've got no better case study than the one that both of you guys were totally involved in. I felt a little bit jealous going through this conversation, by the way. Lots of stuff that I was missing out on, but hey, there we are. The thought that actually just to let you and your journey kind of unfold as you go through. You never thought you would be a CEO. And in fact, even perhaps, even the last couple of weeks, thinking about how on earth you actually made it and you got there. I love that thinking, because it just comes down to being human. It comes down to all of us having a little bit of elements of self-doubt, but then being able to, get in the hot seat, sit in the hot seat, which sometimes can be lonely, but very much, is a job that you love and thrive for. Finally, I guess we talked a few technical elements around pitching and the like, but I thought the one nugget around the thought of being coachable and having a coach in your life, particularly as you move up your career into more senior roles, you felt has been really invaluable for you. In fact, I think you've said it actually changed your life.
Yes,
so it goes to show the impact that it has really had. So there we go. And then finally, of course, don't worry. It'll all be good. Worry is to get the bad stuff twice. So, Larissa, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure.
No, not at all. It's been brilliant. Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you, Larissa.